All right, everyone, welcome in. This is Great Lakes ROTA-RC, which is the Rural Opioid Technical Assistance Regional Center presentation of Grief, the Flip Side of the Trauma-Informed Care presentation. This presentation is being hosted by Great Lakes ROTA-RC's partner, University of Wisconsin-Madison. So we just want to take a minute and thank our partner for hosting today's speaker. I am Amanda Cura. I am going to be your host for this morning. I am also the center's regional program manager. So I welcome you all in and look forward to engaging with you today. Just a couple of things that we want to go over before we get tucked into today's session. So I'm going to ask our presenter to just flip over to our next slide. We want to just cover a couple of housekeeping notices. The first is our funding acknowledgement, and that's just to let you know that we are funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, otherwise known as SAMHSA, to those of you who are in the know. We are a Region 5 SAMHSA division, which covers the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. If you'd like to know a little bit more about the ROTA-RCs, what they're doing, and what's happening next, you can do that on SAMHSA's website. If you'd like that link, please just pop a notice into the chat. We'll be happy to send you those links. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Great Lakes ROTA-RC and what we're up to, that website is there. And myself or Jen Park-Marock, our program director, who's on with us today, are happy to put that in the chat for you, and we'll do that here in a minute. The other thing we would just want to let you know is the core activities of the ROTA-RC for our region and for most regions is to conduct outreach, technical assistance, to provide evidence-based research, and program support. So that's what we're here to do, and that's why we have this virtual education community. So we'd like to hear from you, we'd like to engage with you, and we're glad to see you all here today. So we invite you to learn as much as you can about us and what we're up to. The next thing we want to do is we want to just take a moment to promote the use of affirming first-person language when discussing behavioral health disorders. So as we get to get ourselves ready for today's presentation and we get ready to listen to our speaker today, we just want to create that environment of learning together. We just want to think about and create that safe environment for everyone. And we want to work together to manage a space that supports that non-stigmatizing, recovery-oriented language that can help reduce negative bias and promote engagement. So as we learn about successful promotion, treatment, and recovery, we welcome you formally into Great Lakes ROTA-RC's community of learning. Let's go ahead and shift now into learning a little bit more about our presentation and our presenter today. So I want to welcome our presenter, Kim Buehler-Jones. She's been an educator for 3 decades, spanning early childhood through adult professional education. She earned her Master's of Arts degree in education from St. Mary's University. She learned about grief recovery method during a period of significant loss and having no tools to heal her own grief. She learned the action steps to grief recovery and became an advanced grief recovery method specialist to help others. She provides the grief recovery method to individuals experiencing grief and trains audiences working with individuals at risk to recognize grief and its manifestations to assist in recovery. Open Up Your Soul Smile, the trademark from 2022 is Kim's truthful story, implementing her holistic smile, which stands for Story, Mindfulness, Ignite, Let Go, and Embrace, which is an approach to self-discovery in grief recovery. It's a shift in mind-centered view of the world to heart-centered one. It's a path to an aware life filled with happiness, gratitude, hope, and love. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenter today and put her in her very capable hands.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending today's session. I'm Kim Jones, and I'd like to begin a little bit telling you my story and how I got to where I am. I was a late bloomer. I walked late, I talk late, and I feel that because of that, I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the neurodiverse learners. My career began in the kindergarten classroom. I was a kindergarten teacher for 16 years until the birth of my children and my son's diagnosis of autism. At that point, when he was diagnosed with autism, the doctor recommended that we remove him from school, detox his system of the medications he was taking, and allow him to drive his learning around his strength and interest of technology, and he would succeed. Prior to having children, my father, at the bottom of the screen, suddenly died at 52 of a stroke, and he brought me to my inward journey of grief. I had limited tools as to how to grieve. My family didn't speak about grief or emotion, so I believe that time would heal all of the loss I felt. And after 2 decades, I learned that time wasn't healing my broken heart. I needed to do something with my time. In the center are my children. They are now 21 and 23. At the time this picture was taken, they enjoyed being next to one another. My son, like I had shared, he was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome when he was 9. And my daughter, when she was 7, was diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Both of my children are adopted. At the time that my son was diagnosed, I left teaching and he and I began what we called the Jones Academy. And a year later, our daughter joined us, and the 3 of us, for a span of about 10 years, completed a strength-based virtual homeschool before the world was all set to be on virtual learning with COVID. As I was going through all of my learning as a homeschool mom, I realized that I had been isolating my family to protect them from judgment of others. And it was during that time that my niece, who's in the top right, Bailey, had suddenly died. She was 15 and she had accidentally overdosed on some of her migraine medication. And that added another layer of grief to my family. And then down on the bottom is my brother-in-law, Bob, and my mother-in-law, Sue. Bob was an adult with disabilities, and my husband and I became Bob's guardians to help him live an independent life. For 7 years, he did live on his own with the help of self-directed supports. And during COVID, he suddenly died. And the day before he had died, we found my mother-in-law had a massive stroke. She unfortunately also passed away. She had contracted COVID as she was in recovery, and she died 14 days later. And it was at the period of COVID where we had to watch her suddenly pass away on FaceTime. So all of the losses in such a short amount of time became a lot for me. It was at that same time that my son had already graduated from high school and our daughter was part of the COVID class. So she ended up graduating in the parking lot of our high school. And I sat thinking, what am I going to do? I had been out of the classroom for over 12 years. The one thing that I did know is I knew grief pretty heavily and had come across the Grief Recovery Handbook. And it was that at that time I went on their website and saw that they were looking for grief recovery method specialists. And I thought, that's what I wanted to do. And so my journey with the grief recovery method began one day in July after everybody who had needed me as a caregiver were no longer dependent on me. So today I'd like to share a little bit about what I've lived and learned raising my children, homeschooling my children, as well as doing my own self-awareness journey within trying to heal my grief-stricken heart. So we're going to start with discussing trauma. and then ACEs, followed by what is grief and loss? What are the myths and misinformation of grief that we all believe true? The statistics on isolation and loneliness and why it is at a crisis level and needs to be addressed. The short-term energy relieving behaviors we all have to numb or avoid grief and the pain that it creates within us. What steps you can take next. And then we're going to switch gears and put on our own oxygen mask and look at self-awareness, which will include what is your brain and mind all about, and then some well-being exercises you can begin applying. And then I will end with my holistic smile approach that I use to compile all of the research that I discovered while doing my own self-awareness and grief recovery journey. I'd like to begin with a video. This is Gabor Mate. He is an author. He had written the book, The Myth of Normal, and that's what brought me to his work. And he is a retired physician and also a trauma expert. And I'd like to begin with his video. It's an interview, and he's sharing about grief being the antidote to trauma.
We've been using the word trauma a lot. How does that relate to the word or the experience of grief right now? And is what we're experiencing right now, how much of it is grief and how much is trauma? And is there a difference in the way we approach those two things?
Well, absolutely, because genuine grief is the very opposite of trauma.
Yeah.
If as children we could have grieved what was happening to us, really felt the sadness of not being loved or the sadness of being hurt, grieved it, and grief comes in waves, and it recedes and it comes in and it goes out again, but it abates over time. If we would consciously have grieved, we would not have developed all these coping mechanisms that now keep us in trouble. So trauma actually is the resistance to grief.
Mm-hmm.
Which incidentally, no child can be blamed for. It's just a natural reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So grieving, not in the sense of being hopelessly sad, that's different.
Mm-hmm.
Grieving is coming to terms with the loss. Yes, we've lost something. Yes, it's not going to be the same. Yes, life will go on. You know, so grief really is the antidote to trauma in that sense.
Mm.
Because grief is coming to terms with the reality. Trauma shows up in all our defenses against coming to terms with reality. Well, first of all, let's not assume that we've been traumatized.
Yeah.
So trauma is not the same as suffering. Trauma is not the same as pain. Trauma is not the same as fear. Those are natural responses to events. Trauma is when we get stuck somehow around those events and their impact on us. So I dare say that I do see a lot of awareness in the world. The death of George Floyd need not be traumatic. And the people that are out there marching and demonstrating and taking action or supporting those who do, they will not be traumatized because they're responding to something very painful and very cruel and very unjust, almost unspeakable. But they're responding to it actively with a sense of agency. So that's the whole point. If you respond actively with a sense of agency, this will not have been traumatic. Now, if it triggers in us a deeply held sense of helplessness and a primordial sense of isolation, then it can reinforce the trauma that already lives in us.
Yes.
So I think the first thing to realize is that we have agency, or we can choose. And that capacity, while it may not be accessible to all of us at all times, is available to all of us ultimately. So the question is, how do we support our clients and the people who are relying on us? How do we support their capacity to choose? And that depends on how we cultivate our own capacity to choose. So when I train people in my compassionate inquiry method of therapy, which you guys have programs about, it's all about the self first. How do we get in touch with, how do we inquire into ourselves so that we can show up as active agents in our own lives when we deal with our clients?
Before I continue on, I thought I'd open up the chat for a minute if anybody would like to comment on what they took away from the video. Amanda, any comments, or should I continue?
Not so far. If you want to pause for another minute here.
Okay.
Anyone want to share kind of what they thought, or have you seen Gabor Mate's presentation before or this video before? Let's see. Cheryl said, it's very interesting, the concept of responding actively.
Okay.
And Tanya shared, interesting concept that not grieving results in processing events as trauma.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to give some definitions that came from Gabor Mate as well as the grief recovery method. Trauma is the lasting emotional response that often results from living through a distressing or a traumatic event. A traumatic event could also be called a loss event. Either way, the result is the same, grief. Trauma is not the same as suffering. It is not the same as pain. Those are natural responses to events. Trauma is when we get stuck in one of these. And Gabor also shared that trauma is the resistance to grief. It's about what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. And as I go throughout today, I'm going to be sharing what exactly we can do differently, first in identifying the grief, and then action steps to start considering when looking at recovery. I'd like to begin with a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. If you could raise your hand, how many of you have given the ACEs test to your clients, or perhaps even taken it yourself? So it looks like many of you are familiar with the ACEs test. Well, I'd like to share a little bit how it's connected and why it's important to identify those ACEs in your clients as well as within yourself, because as many of you know, it does lead to adult disease. ACEs are traumatic events such as violence, abuse, caregivers dealing with mental health or substance use problems occurring in childhood. In adulthood, ACEs have been linked. The larger the number of ACEs, the greater risk of the following health risks: chronic health problems such as heart disease, cancer, asthma, kidney disease, stroke, diabetes, and obesity. It contributes to the mental illness of depression. It can lead to substance misuse, such as smoking and drinking, and it can negatively impact one's education, employment, and earning potential. So the earlier it can be identified, then therapies can be in place and tools can be taught so that people can start healing from their unresolved grief that they may not be aware that they are experiencing. Now, what is grief? Grief is the normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. It is the response to a change in or end of any familiar pattern of behavior. It comes from a lifetime accumulation of things that were unsaid, undone, or unfinished. Grief is associated with conflicting feelings such as good and bad memories. And grief is coming to terms with loss. It is the antidote to trauma. Here are some statistics on grief that many of you may not be aware of. Grief contributes to $942 billion of productivity and business growth that's been affected. It affects 1.5 million children. 5% of the children in the United States have lost one or both parents by the age of 15. 2.5 million people die in the United States annually, each leaving an average of 5 grieving people behind. 40% of grievers meet the criteria for major depression 1 month after the loss, and 24% still meet the criteria after 2 months. 4.5% of all employees in the United States have been grieving the loss of a close family member or loved one. 57% have experienced a close loss in the last 3 years. And 32% of the people have experienced a family member, a death of a family member. 20% have experienced the death of a pet. 3% a spouse, and 2% have lost their children. And 100% of us are grievers. Now, grief not only comes from losing people, but also in the careers that you may have. If you work in a field where you are a caregiver, providing services for others, being empathetic to your clients or those you care for, or perhaps teach or parent, the empathy that you provide, you're bringing the grief of those that you care for into yourself, and it adds to your own. And over time, if you're not addressing the grief that you're acquiring in your own personal life, as well as the addition of your career, that can lead to something called compassion fatigue. So it's different than burnout, but all of your compassion that you give to those you serve becomes heavy, in addition to the own unresolved grief that you may be lugging around that you're not aware of. Here's some interesting statistics. 89% of Americans agree that everyone should learn to talk about grief, yet 70% don't have the skills they need, saying they're often unsure what to do when someone they care about is grieving. And from the Grief Recovery Handbook, we are taught how to acquire things in life, but not what to do when we lose them. And that's the key. We don't know all of the grief that we're carrying around. And as we identify it, we're not sure how to let it go in a healthy way to heal those heart wounds. So you may be wondering, what is a loss? A loss is more than death. And it looks like some of the following. A loss occurs for all of us when we're little, when we lose our binkies, our blankets, and our bottles. That is a loss. There's loss of an addiction, moving, abuse, divorce, graduation, an empty nest, pets, a job loss, financial loss, illness, floods, a loss of safety, incarceration, foster care and separation, death, your health change in relationships, a pregnancy, miscarriage, new supports and services, separation from siblings and friends, a loss of your stuff, your belonging in a group, your loss of self in your identity, the loss of normal, hopes, dreams, and expectations of a different, better, or more future. Those are all losses. Change, change, change. That's what loss is. And grief is the emotional response to those losses. So let's pause a minute. And if you would like, take a minute and write down all of the losses that come to mind throughout your lifetime, from the time you were born up until the time of now.
I just want to double check too. We have a couple people who have raised hands. If you have questions, if you want to ask those questions, or if their hands were just raised from before. Okay.
And if anybody feels comfortable and would be willing to chat some of the losses that they see on this list, or maybe have thought of otherwise, that never really considered a loss, that would be greatly appreciated.
Have moved, separation from parents,
Okay.
moving my father to a nursing home,
Mm-hmm.
my child is leaving me for college in 3 days.
That's hard.
Yeah. Granddaughter starting kindergarten today. A
Wow,
divorce.
congratulations.
Yeah.
Wow.
Most recent isolation from COVID for 3 years.
Yes, COVID had a lot.
Mm-hmm. Moving child to college. The idea that all change brings loss, because even a change that you want and work for has an element of loss to it. Getting a new job means losing the comfort and routine of the old one. That's a good point.
Yes. Very good.
Family home sold as a teen.
Mm-hmm.
Miscarriage and trust.
Mm-hmm. And for me, I had adoption and infertility, although those aren't up there. Those were a lot of losses. And here are some more losses to consider. The loss of attachment, the loss of territory, the loss of structure, loss of identity, the loss of future, the loss of meaning, and the loss of control. Those all impact and create grief that builds within you as well. And grief is cumulative and cumulatively negative. I'd like you to now think about your clients. If you are working with a client and you put yourself in their shoes and tried to look at all of the losses that they've endured in their life that you're aware of, does that help give more of an empathetic understanding to all of the grief that they're carrying as well, based on change and what you've discovered in loss? I'd like to move on now and talk a little bit about the misinformation and myths that about grief that we may believe true. The first one is don't feel bad. I don't know if many of you have heard that. I remember hearing it growing up. As a teacher, I would do it in my classroom. If a person skinned their knee, don't feel bad. Here's a Band-Aid. Don't feel bad. Just here's a cookie. If you had broken up when you were younger, well, there are more fish in the sea. And those all the don't feel bad may at the time help you feel different, but it never makes you feel better. The second myth that we tend to use with grief is replace the loss. So if you had a pet die, well, don't worry, we'll get you another fish tomorrow. It's okay, don't feel bad. Replace the loss and don't feel bad typically go hand in hand. Number 3 is grieve alone. And that is where isolation falls and can be detrimental to one's well-being because we are emotional beings in a thinking world. We need connection as a foundational need, just like food, shelter, and water. And when somebody is grieving, we send the message, we don't want to hear about drama or chaos. Nobody wants to listen to a Debbie Downer or a complaining person. So you begin to associate connection with only sharing the positive emotions, and grief is a heavy negative emotion. And so you learn to grieve alone and isolate. Number 4, time heals all wounds. Just give it time, it'll get better. But the problem is time doesn't heal grief. It's what you do in the time that heals the grief. I went 20 years thinking that time was going to heal the grief that I had with my dad. And I realized after I had gone through the grief recovery method that it was no wonder I was feeling as heavy as I was and still missed him as much as I had, because time wasn't healing it. And I needed to put action steps in place to heal the loss I felt. Number 5, this was a big one in my family, just be strong. Put on a smile. If somebody asked me how I was fine. Everything was good in my world, even though isolating my family at home and homeschooling was probably one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, because I never envisioned I would be a homeschool mom. I thought I would be teaching kindergarten until I retired. And I never dreamed homeschooling would be in the picture. And I had a lot of question as to what I was doing. So I wanted to protect my children and my family from the judgment of society based on what we were doing. And number 6, keep busy. That was another one that was big in my family growing up. As long as you keep busy, time passes. And with time, all wounds heal. And so the busier we kept, then we didn't have to feel the pain or think about the grief that we were carrying around. So what I'd like to do is just pause again and have you think about the myths that your family believed true. And did they think of other myths or model other myths and misinformation about grief? Rather than talking about it, were there other behaviors, or were you told other things by the adults or your caregivers that had you not expressed the grief that you felt in situations? And if you're open to sharing in chat, we'll just take a minute and see if there's any responses.
Comments are, God never gives us more than we can handle. That is done and over, so we need to move on.
Mhm. Yes, very true. Okay. We'll move
The
on.
race isn't
Oh.
given to the weak. The question, why are you still sad, as if time heals? Some
Mhm.
losses in my family were taboo. You never spoke about it.
My family too.
Forgive and forget.
Mhm.
Close that chapter of the book. It won't always be like this.
Mhm.
It could be worse.
Yes.
All you need to do is pray about it, not talk about it. Time heals everything. Let's see. And this too shall pass.
Mhm.
Looks like that's everything so far.
Okay.
Oh, wait. I didn't like it when they would say, don't feel bad, and they make you feel bad. And I didn't like it when they didn't speak about it. Just move
Mhm.
on with what happened, which isn't right. Hearing is a process.
That is correct. So using a shame tactic to silence you from your
Mhm.
emotion. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Healing is a process. I'm sorry. There we go.
Okay.
Hearing is also a process as well. Hearing is part
It
of
is.
healing. So I mean,
Hearing,
it was a,
healing. Yes.
yeah.
Okay. We all have behaviors to numb the pain. Grief registers in your brain at the same area that spilling hot coffee on yourself does, or breaking a bone. So, of course, your brain is going to try to keep you from experiencing pain, and we all have behaviors. The grief recovery method calls them short-term energy relieving behaviors. They're a temporary fix to numb or avoid the pain of the grief that you feel within. And they look different for all of us. They can be food, work, alcohol, tobacco, drug, street or prescription, shopping, violence, risk-taking, cleaning, exercise, sleep, cutting, sports, video games, social media, fantasy, your cell phone, picking, anger, gambling, sex, relationships, running away, vaping, organizing, binge watching TV. Mine was researching and reading. I call myself a recovering researchaholic because that's how I kept my head above water here at home with my kids. And isolation. We all have some form of behavior to stay busy, to not go down the deep rabbit hole and feel the heaviness of grief. So what STIRBs do you use? I shared that I am a researchaholic. Reading was my way. I would clean, and food for me was a big one. We'll pause again and see if anybody's willing to share in the chat.
Organizing and cleaning, sleep, food, TV, binge eating, cooking, baking. I obsessively, I pick up a craft. I don't know if anyone's into diamond art or know what that is.
Yeah.
I got all into it like post-COVID, and then I don't anymore. I use walking therapy. It's a good one. Cleaning, spending, travel, adrenaline junkie activities. A lot of these are good things in balance, right? That's a lot.
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of this
Right.
is like
It's
traveling.
when,
That sounds amazing, right?
yeah,
I want to hang out with Brenda, but the problem is sometimes we get excessive. That's why they're difficult, right? Excessive napping, prayer, exercise.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing. We all have them, but you are correct, Amanda, in balance. When you're doing them, to pause and ask yourself, are you doing it for the enjoyment, or are you avoiding something painful that you just don't want to go there? Loneliness and isolation is an epidemic. And here are some statistics that make you look at your own, if you're isolating, questioning it, and helping yourself or your clients connect. 52% of Americans feel lonely. 61% of Generation Zers feel lonely. 73% of millennials feel lonely. 46% of men and 45% of women feel lonely. 1 in 3 people with autism are socially isolated. 50% of people with disabilities are lonely. 1 in 4 feel lonely every day. Loneliness increases your likelihood of mortality by 26%. If you live alone, that increases 29%. And it's 32%. Social isolation is 29%. If you live alone, that increases to 32%. Because again, we are biologically hardwired for connection. The health risks are what need to be focused, and that is 50% increased risk of developing dementia for ages 65 and older. It's associated with stroke at 32% and heart disease at 29%. It weakens your immune system, it increases your blood pressure, and it contributes to type 2 diabetes. You have an increased risk of mental illness, anxiety, and depression, and it's associated with eating disorders, addiction, and high-risk behaviors. Isolation is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it has an incredible health risk, and why it is very important to become aware when you are isolating to avoid the grief, because it has lasting effects to your health. So you may be thinking, what next? Here are some suggestions. 1, reflect on your own grief and stirbs and locate evidence-based methods which provide you with the grief recovery tools you need to heal from your broken heart. Reflect on how your agency addresses grief and create ways to include grief as part of your intake and/or assessment protocols. Raise awareness of what loss and grief are and how they are correlated with ACEs and addiction, as well as compassion fatigue. And Gabor Mate had, his quote is, shift your perspective from why the addiction to why the pain. Seeing that addiction can be a stirb to numb the grief. So rather than focusing on the addiction, you need to look deeper. So before I go on and shift gears to self-awareness, are there any questions, comments, or concerns before I move on to providing the oxygen mask?
Nothing so far.
Okay, all right. They say that self-awareness is the meta skill of the 21st century. And as you saw in the video earlier, you need to become an active agent in your own life before you can serve others at the level that you have potential to. The reason self-awareness is so important is because it does have health benefits also. It helps you identify and give voice to what you need and want in life. It improves your creativity, innovation, and decision-making. It helps you identify and manage and observe your emotions. It leads to healthier reactions to external factors. It boosts your productivity and your ability for positive change. It improves your self-esteem and well-being. And it strengthens your relationships and helps you ward off loneliness. And from the book Insight by Tasha Eurich, 85% of people believe that they are self-aware, but her research shows that actually 10 to 15% of people truly are self-aware. So you may think that you are self-aware, but statistically, you may not be. So I'd like you to begin thinking about what you're thinking and what your brain and mind do for you. So if you would jot down your response to these questions, you might be interested in seeing how many thoughts do you have in a day? Just write down what you believe. And if anybody's willing to chat their guess, that would be greatly appreciated. Any responses?
We have a guess at 80,000, 4,000, 50 to 80,000. Couple of guesses there.
Great. Okay. Now, what percent of your thoughts are repetitive? You had them yesterday, the day before, the week before, perhaps months earlier. Jot down what percent you think.
Got some more guesses coming. There are 1,000 thoughts that go through a minute. Too many that if I had a bad thought, I lay there at night lost in my thoughts. Daily, most of them, 80%, 80% consistently, always like a hamster wheel.
Awesome. Thank you. What percent of your thoughts are negative? Any responses?
Coming a lot. 51%. 30. Right now, 80%. Oh, someone's not having maybe a good day. A couple a day, 70%.
Okay.
Too many, but I'm trying to be better about this. 20 to 30%.
Great. And when does your brain stop growing or rewiring itself?
Never. Never, never, never. As soon as you let it.
Okay. All right. Great job. So here is the answer. Your brain processes approximately 70,000 thoughts a day. 80% of them are negative. 95% of our thoughts are repeated daily and reflect the mindset or our beliefs. Our subconscious mind is 30,000 times more powerful than our conscious mind. It takes half a second for a thought to occur. Your brain is in search of what's right and wrong, and it makes these assessments between 20 and 50,000 times a day. You think about the future 59 times a day. And according to cognitive neuroscientists, our conscious mind is made up of only 5%, While most of our decisions, actions, emotions, and behaviors depend on 95% of our brain, which is done at a subconscious or unaware level. That's why self-awareness is such a big deal, because most of what we do is at a subconscious level. Your brain has neuroplasticity. That means your brain has the ability to rewire itself to change for your lifetime. So you all have the ability to rewire your brain, which most of you did share. Your brain rewires forever, which is true. Whoops. Oh, I apologize about that. There are some exercises that can help you when you're becoming self-aware and you're discovering and you're experiencing grief and other emotions. There are some exercises that you can do in those moments, and you do have control over them. One of them is called the 90-second rule, and this was created by Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. She wrote the book Whole Brain Living. She is a brain analyst who had a stroke when she was 36. At the time that she had her stroke, her left hemisphere stopped working. And she spent 8 years basically doing rehab to bring it back online. And it was during her rehabilitation that she realized that an emotion, when you have a thought, that triggers an emotion, which then triggers a physiological response in your body. That whole process takes 90 seconds. So it's up to you. Are you going to act on the thought, which brings the emotion? Let's say it's anger, which gets your heart racing, and you start saying things that you may not have otherwise said, rather than react to the emotion and what your body is doing. You have 90 seconds for it to work its way through the bloodstream. So you can either react, or you can just observe how you're feeling, what the thought is and what the emotion is. What happens is we tend to think the thought, it goes through our blood system, and then we think the thought some more, and it's just a pattern that goes round and round, and you stay angry and frustrated, and it just, you're like the hamster on the wheel. So you need to be aware you have 90 seconds to do something different, which is the self-awareness piece. And some of those would be, you could go to your breath. We know that the breath is the remote control to your brain. If you become conscious of purposefully going to your breath, you can observe those emotions and let them run through your bloodstream and not have to chase them round and round and invite them in and then stay angry or upset. There are many breathing techniques. One of them was created by Dr. Andrew Weil, and it's called the 4-7-8 breathing technique. And I thought what we could do, if you feel comfortable, is I will have you close your eyes and we will practice ourselves. You are going to breathe in your nose for 4 seconds. You will hold your breath for 7 seconds and then breathe out your mouth forcibly for 8 seconds. And we will do that we'll do 3 reps of it. So if you would like to please close your eyes, sit up straight, feel relaxed. And if you will breathe in your nose for the count of 4, 3, 4, hold it for 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out your mouth for 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, in for 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and one more. In for 4, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. If you do that technique and make it part of your routine in the morning and at night, even if you just do it for a set of 2, it will become an automatic pattern. And there's lots of research showing that it can help from everything from people helping with their panic attacks to, he talked about studies where it's helped people with AFib, bowel issues, all kinds of health conditions. So it's definitely a breathing technique that if you become practicing it, it will become habitual. The other one is box breathing, which is 4, 4, 4, 4. So you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Another activity that you can do is called a grounding exercise. And what that is if you find yourself ruminating in thought about something, you immediately break the thought by looking for 5 things in your environment that you see, 4 that you hear, 3 that you smell, 2 that you touch, 1 that you taste. And in doing that, purposefully shifting your attention, it breaks your thought pattern, and that will stop you from ruminating on a thought. The other activity, which some of you had talked about, is practicing gratitude and awe. There's a lot of science to the health benefits of both of them. And what we had talked about, your brain is always rewiring and it's 80% negative. So that's the default mode of your brain. So what you want to do is start practicing gratitude, making it a part of your daily practice, thinking of 3 things that went well for you that day. It will become part of your routine, which will strengthen the positive in the day versus the default mode of the negative thoughts. And in doing so, it will build your immune system. It lessens depression. It creates positive emotion, such as joy, optimism, and happiness. It creates stronger relationships. And it also lessens the feeling of loneliness and isolation, which we know is epidemic at this point. Another thing that you can do is smile. Smile is contagious, and it's because you have something in your brain called mirror neurons. They are neurons that mirror what you see. Earlier, I had shared that your brain is always looking for welcome or warning. It's looking at the eyes, it's looking at the people's faces, and a smile is the universal sign of kindness, and it is contagious. It has health benefits. When you smile, you produce the happy hormone in your brain. Even if you fake smile, it's doing you good. It helps with immunity. It lowers your blood pressure. It creates stronger relationships. And remember, we are born to belong and be connected. So a smile is a simple way to build that connection. And of course, laughter is the best medicine. 20 seconds of laughing a day, fake or real, actually has heart healthy benefits. It also lowers your blood pressure. It helps with immunity. It produces those happy hormones. And so I'd like to leave you with a little bit of heart healthy exercise. And I will explain the story behind the video once we enjoy the little boy having fun with his dad. And a little bit about the little boy. His father took a very heavy situation. That letter was a job loss letter that he received, and he shifted perspective on seeing it in the lens of gratitude and happiness, and he made it into a situation where he brought laughter to his son and himself, and in return took a very heavy, grief-stricken moment and shed some laughter on it. I'd like to end today talking just a brief moment about the smile approach that I have created. Like I shared, my journey at home with my children, the doctor was correct. He said when he diagnosed my son at 9 that if I immersed him in his strength and interest, he would succeed. He is now 23. He lives on his own. He works a full-time job doing what he loves, and that's putting computers into arcade machines for people's homes. And he is also converting people's old videos and technology into current technology so that they can have smiles on their faces when they see memories gone by. So the doctor was correct. What he advised did work. And my daughter, she is also thriving. She is 21. She is a caregiver for adults with disabilities. She completed her degree as a medical assistant. She lives on her own, and she is continuing to make her independent place in this world, and I couldn't be happier for both of them. When they both graduated and Bob had passed away, I stood thinking, now what am I going to do? I've been out of the classroom for over 13 years. It was just after COVID was starting to dissipate or lessen, and I didn't feel that I was supposed to go back to the kindergarten classroom, but my heart is still an educator. So I took all of the research that I lived and learned, and I compiled them within the acronym of SMILE. And it's an avenue or an approach to take the smile on your face and connect it with the one within your heart, because it is a balance. We live in a thinking world, but we are first and foremost emotional beings, and we need to connect heart to heart and not head to head or even head to heart. And so the SMILE approach is the wisdom of the ages and experts in various fields that I compiled in an organized way under SMILE. So S is for story, which involves a lot of the work of Brene Brown and her vulnerability research, and why it's important to know what your story is, but speak it truthfully to those who have earned the right to hear your story. And I leave all of you with a question under each letter. Under S, what is your authentic story? And then question yourself, what story do you tell yourself? And is that story true to yourself? And is it true to those that you share it with? M is mindfulness. There's a lot of research on the benefits of mindfulness. And one component under mindfulness is self-compassion. Are you truly your own best friend? Do you talk to yourself the way that you would talk to a best friend? Or do you allow the self-critical messages capture your thoughts and kind of keep you stuck? I is for ignite. That's looking at your passion and purpose. What is your meaning in life? What do you enjoy doing? Do you have a bucket list? Do you allow time to invest in you and discover who your inner artist is and what brings you joy and true fun? L is for letting go. That's the grief, that's boundaries. Do you have a person in your life who's your heart with ears? What that means is, do they truly listen They do not criticize, they don't judge, they don't give you a solution. They are merely a heart with ears, no mouth. They are there to listen and to support, not judge, criticize, compare, or give you a solution to the problem. And E is for embrace your life every day. Look for the gratitude, find the awe. See each day as they come, because we never know when it's going to be our last. Do you express your gratitude to those that mean something to you? Do you find the good, the silver linings in the days that are so heavy that it's really hard to find them? There was a 75-year study done by Harvard. It was the 75-year Harvard study, and they followed 700 men. Some of them attended Harvard, others grew up in the poverty-stricken areas of Harvard, of Boston, and they followed them for generations. And they came to find, and what they wanted to know was what makes happiness, what leads to a happy, healthy life. And what they found from the 75-year study, which is the longest ever done, it came down to meaningful relationships. That is what brought happiness and longevity to the people, and some of them are still alive. And the question that the happiness, the good life, that's the book that the Harvard study director wrote just recently. If you had to make one life choice right now to put yourself on the path to future health and happiness, what would it be? So I leave you with that question. And think long and hard. What would that be for you? And I thank you for today. I'm grateful for your participation and spending the morning with me. And I would like to open up for questions, comments, and we'll be here at the end also if you would feel more comfortable with that. So thank you very much, and keep smiling.